I still remember that autumn evening when we bought our first house in the Boston suburbs. The wooden mansion with white columns at the entrance, surrounded by tall maples that every October turned bright red. We moved here 3 years ago, leaving behind our small city apartment and starting a new life in this spacious home with 2 bedrooms, a bright kitchen, and a huge fireplace in the living room. Every morning started the same way. The light aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the smell of toasted bread. I loved watching as the sun's rays penetrated through the curtains on the kitchen window, creating intricate patterns on the wooden floor. Emily was always the first to wake up. She adored early morning walks around our street, where each tree had its own story.
Good morning, darling.
She would say, kissing me on the cheek before going for a run. Her hair smelled of lavender, and her eyes sparkled with anticipation of a new day. I worked as a marketer in a large company, and our days were scheduled down to the minute, but every evening we found time for a joint dinner by candlelight, conversations about everything and nothing, and long walks through our cozy garden. Our bedroom on the second floor became a real refuge from the outside world. The antique bed made of red wood, covered with a soft woolen blanket, windows with a view of the backyard where an old apple tree grew. All this created an atmosphere of warmth and security. On cold winter evenings, we loved to settle by the fireplace with books or movies, listening to how the logs crackled. Everything seemed so perfect. Work, home, relationships, everything was thought out to the smallest detail. Every corner of our home was filled with memories, photographs of our travels on the walls, the collection of porcelain figurines that Emily had been collecting for years, her favorite flower pots on the windowsills. We even developed a habit of cooking something new together every Sunday. Her laughter at my clumsy attempts to properly cut ingredients sounded like the most pleasant music in the world. "You're chopping the onion too coarsely again," she would laugh, taking the knife from my hands, and I would just smile, watching her focused expression as she carefully followed the recipe. This perfect world continued to exist until that fateful day. Chapter 2. First Cracks. The first signs appeared subtly, like thin cracks on the surface of glass, almost imperceptible, but already foretelling trouble. It started with little things. Emily's phone, which she always kept close at hand, now constantly ended up out of reach. Her strange pauses during conversations. Frequent absences on business that became more and more frequent. One morning, when I went downstairs to make coffee, I noticed a strange detail. Her favorite bag was not where it usually was. She normally placed it neatly on the hook by the entrance door, but now it lay on the kitchen table, open, with the inside pocket turned inside out. In the air hung a barely perceptible scent of perfume that I had never noticed before. Sweet, spicy, completely unlike her usual lavender smell.
Just forgot to close it.
She explained, coming back a few minutes later with a smile that somehow seemed a little less sincere than usual. But then I attributed it to fatigue. Lately, she really did look somewhat distant. Winter in Boston that year turned out to be especially severe. Snowy veils outside the window created a feeling of isolation, and the gray days seemed to envelop us in their gloom. Our evening walks became less frequent, and our conversations over dinner shorter. Sometimes I caught myself watching her movements, trying to understand if something had changed or if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Especially memorable was one evening when I came home earlier than usual. Glancing into the bedroom, I noticed that her side of the bed looked untouched. The sheets were neatly made, the pillows perfectly aligned, as if someone had deliberately prepared the place for inspection. At work, I also began to notice changes. She started taking leave in the middle of the day more often, using various excuses, meetings with friends, medical examinations, shopping. Once I accidentally overheard her phone conversation in the office hallway. Her voice was quieter than usual, the intonation livelier than the one she used with me. I couldn't make out specific words, but the tone with which she spoke caused the first alarm bells to ring in my heart. Evenings, when we sat by the fireplace, I noticed how her gaze sometimes wandered off into the distance, as if she was somewhere far away. At such moments, I felt an invisible wall rising between us, one that couldn't be overcome with ordinary words. And yet, I continued to convince myself that everything was fine, that these were just temporary difficulties that occur in every marriage, that work, everyday pressure, possibly even seasonal affective disorder. All this could explain her change in behavior. But deep down, I was already beginning to understand that the truth might be much more complicated. Chapter 3. Discovering the Truth. That day started like any other. A cold December morning outside the window, a gray sky promising an impending snowfall. I hurried to work, and Emily said she'd be home, planning to work on painting one of the rooms, a project she had been discussing for weeks. "Don't forget to buy the paint we chose," she reminded me, as she saw me off at the door. During lunch break, I decided to stop by a hardware store near the office to buy necessary materials. When I returned, it was only 4:30, much earlier than my usual return time. Approaching the house, I noticed a car parked in front of our porch. A black SUV I had never seen before. Something inside me froze when I noticed the house keys sticking out of the lock. My heart started beating faster as I slowly entered. The silence in the house was broken only by soft footsteps upstairs. My gaze caught the mobile phone Emily had left on the kitchen table. The screen was unlocked, showing messages she had apparently forgotten to hide.
Will it work today?
"Read one of the last messages,"
Yes, he's gone.
she replied to herself.
Don't worry, I know how to keep him busy.
My hands began to tremble as I carefully placed the phone back on the table. Taking slow steps toward the staircase, I heard their voices coming from our bedroom. Time seemed to stand still as I turned the doorknob. The scene that unfolded before me was as simple as it was devastating. Emily was there, in our bed, with a man I immediately recognized, Jason Williams, our neighbor down the lane. His wife had moved in with her parents a month ago, and he, seemingly, was the most loyal friend of our family, often helping with various household tasks. The moment hung in the air. They both stared at me wide-eyed, unable to believe that I was actually standing there. Emily's face turned white as a sheet. "Michael," she whispered, but couldn't find any more words. Jason, on the contrary, looked more composed, though his hands were trembling as he tried to cover himself with a blanket.
It's not what you think.
He began, but I closed the door in his face, leaving them in the room. In the corridor, I leaned against the wall, trying to decide what to do next. The air in the house felt thick, saturated with a strange mixture of scents, her perfume and something else, male, that I couldn't immediately identify. Descending the stairs, I noticed the wedding photo hanging in the hall. Her joyful smile, my happy gaze, everything now seemed part of another reality. I took the frame off the wall and placed it on the commode, unable to look at this image of tranquil happiness. In the living room, the embers in the fireplace were still glowing from the morning. I sat on the couch, feeling the cold seeping through my skin, despite the warmth of the house. My head was spinning with questions I wasn't ready to seek answers to yet. How long had this been going on? Why exactly him? What happened to our love? Time seemed to slow down as I heard footsteps above. They were coming down, and I knew I had to make a decision. Face them head on or leave, leaving this house and our entire history behind. The choice was excruciatingly difficult, but something inside suggested that everything would change forever today. Chapter 4. The Conversation That Changed Everything. They descended into the living room in complete silence, interrupted only by the crackling of embers in the fireplace. Emily walked first, her face pale, her eyes avoiding mine. Jason followed, maintaining an appearance of calmness, though his hands were still trembling.
Michael, let me explain.
She began, stopping opposite me. Her voice sounded hoarse, as if she had been silent for a long time.
It's not what you think.
What do I think? I interrupted, striving to remain calm. That I caught my wife in bed with my best friend? She stepped back as if physically feeling the force of my words.
Michael, it didn't happen all at once. It developed gradually.
Developed? I repeated, feeling anger rising within me. So you spent months fooling me? Jason tried to intervene.
Michael, it's not only her fault.
You shut up, I yelled, turning to him for the first time. You hypocrite! You were my neighbor, my friend, and this is how you repay years of friendship? Emily grabbed his hand, forcing him to be silent.
Michael, listen to me. Michael, it wasn't planned. It started with simple conversations, friendship. Then everything changed. I didn't know what I was doing.
Didn't know? My voice became cold, like the winter wind. You don't have the right to talk about this now. You betrayed trust, lies, deception. This is your passion.
Michael, I didn't mean to hurt you.
Enough! I interrupted her, feeling the urge to destroy everything growing inside. You have no right to speak now. You lost the right to touch me the moment you decided to go ahead with this. She sat down on the couch next to me, her hands trembling.
Michael, I don't know what to do. I love you, but...
Love? My voice turned cold and bitter. You don't know what love is. Love isn't betrayal. Love is trust, respect, honesty. She reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. Don't touch me. You lost the right to touch me the moment you decided to betray me. A heavy pause hung in the air. The fire had completely died out, leaving only cold embers. I looked at their frightened faces and realized I couldn't stay in this room, in this house, with these people any longer. I'm leaving, I said, heading for the door. And know this, everything between us is over. Forever. Chapter 5. Consequences of Betrayal. After that night, I moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. A one-room den with peeling paint on the walls and a creaky parquet floor seemed to me the perfect place for a person who had lost everything. Every evening I sat by the window, watching the city lights, trying to understand how to live further when the foundation of your life has been destroyed. Work became my only escape. I started taking extra projects, working overtime, just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. Colleagues noticed the changes in me. I became more withdrawn, smiled less, communicated less. But no one asked for details. After all, Americans know how to keep their secrets. Emily tried to contact me several times. She called, wrote messages, came to my office.
Michael, let's talk.
She wrote in her messages.
I need to explain.
But I didn't want to hear any explanations. For me, everything was clear. The trust we built over years was now completely destroyed. Spring came unusually early, and with each passing day, sunlight increasingly penetrated through the windows of my new apartment. However, instead of joy, they caused only pain. I remembered how we used to sit on the terrace of our house, watching nature awaken. Now those memories had turned into sharp needles piercing my heart. Problems arose at work. I began making mistakes that were previously impossible for me. Colleagues started noticing changes in my productivity. "Michael, are you okay?" my boss asked, but I merely nodded in response, unwilling to reveal my pain to others. One evening, after another long day, I met my old friend Tom in a bar near the office. We hadn't seen each other for several years, and his question about my personal life made me freeze. "I'm divorced," I briefly answered, lowering my eyes into my glass. Tom raised his eyebrows in surprise, but didn't press further. He knew some wounds are better left untouched. Time flowed slowly, like a spring river, but each day brought new reminders of the lost happiness. I began noticing familiar couples on the streets, people holding hands, laughing together, making plans for the future. Each such scene caused fresh pain, reopening old wounds. One day, I accidentally passed by our old house. The windows were darkened. Jason's car was still in its usual spot. I stopped, feeling my heart constrict in my chest. Over these months, I often imagined how I could have acted differently, how I could have saved our marriage, found a way to forgive. But each time these thoughts dissolved into thin air, leaving only a sense of emptiness. Colleagues began noticing that I participated less in corporate events, refused invitations to parties and celebrations. "Michael, you need to distract yourself," advised one of the girls from the HR department. "Find a new meaning in life." But I knew nothing could bring back what was lost. Summer in Boston turned out to be particularly hot. Air conditioners in the office couldn't handle the load, and people walked the streets in t-shirts and shorts. I continued working, immersing myself in routine that was supposed to protect me from reality. But at night, lying in my new bed, I often remembered the scent of her perfume, her laughter, her touches, everything that now seemed distant and unreal. Chapter 6. Final Chord. Autumn arrived quickly, bringing with it the first cold winds and yellow leaves swirling around my new home. I received official divorce documents, standard forms signed by the judge that formally concluded our story. But inside me, a storm of emotions continued to rage that no papers could calm. Emily and Jason stayed in our old house. Occasionally, I noticed their car passing by my office, but now it only caused a feeling of indifference. Pain gradually turned into a cold void that filled every cell of my being. Significant changes began at work. The company announced large-scale restructuring, and many employees started looking for new opportunities. I also submitted my resignation, realizing I couldn't stay in a place tied to our past. Management tried to persuade me to stay, offering promotion and salary increase, but I knew it was time to move forward. The last working day turned out to be especially difficult. Colleagues organized a farewell party, but I interacted little, preferring to sit aside, examining photos of our team. On one snapshot, I noticed myself, smiling, confident, happy. Now this person seemed foreign to me, belonging to another life. The move to a new city became an act of purification for me. I chose San Francisco, a place that was never connected to our past. An apartment on the outskirts of the city, with a view of the ocean, became my new home. Here I began learning to live anew, without constant reminders of lost happiness. But even in this new place, ghosts of the past continued to haunt me. Evenings when waves crashed against the shore, I often remembered our conversations by the fireplace, her touches, her laughter. These memories became part of me, like a scar after a deep wound. They will always remind me of what was lost. 2 years have passed. I found a new job in an IT company, made friends, started surfing. All things that previously seemed alien to me. But inside remained a thin crack that would never fully heal. I learned to live with this pain, turning it into a source of strength, but every time I saw happy couples, it became slightly harder. One day, I accidentally came across an article in a local newspaper. Former neighbor Jason Williams married another woman. The message evoked a strange feeling in me, a mix of bitterness and relief. Now I knew for sure that everything was finally over. Our story, our home, our dreams. Now, sitting by the window of my apartment and watching the city lights, I understand one important thing. Love is not only joy and happiness. It is also pain and destruction that can change a person forever. And although I can never return to those days when everything seemed perfect, I've learned to value every moment while it lasts.